Today we're going to look at 1 Chronicles 19 through 22. Add one chapter to today's readings. Tomorrow, of course, being Sunday, I'll come live from Mabel and Sutton at 9 o'clock with worship. And then we'll go up to McHenry for 10:30 worship, of course. That's just a normal Sunday for me. And I hope that on your day today is a good day, and that on your Sunday, if you can't join us in person, that you join us here on Facebook Live. In this reading today, beginning at chapter 19, Nahash, who had been the king of Ammon, died, and his son takes the kingship of Hanan. And David decides to, out of the friendship that he had with the king that had passed away, with King Nahash, he sends a delegation of people to offer comfort, to show the mutual respect, and to honor this king who has died. However, the advisors of this new young king put doubt into this young king's mind as to David's true intentions, and they tell him, that these men are here as spies. They're looking out, and David's going to come, and he's going to, attack us. And so the king, this new king, orders that these men are shaved, shaves them, cuts off their garments, and sends them away embarrassed, and I mean, that's almost an act of war right there, And when David hears about the disgrace that has come to his men, because to have a beard and to have it trimmed and looking nice, and this was an honorable thing for them. And David says, well, before you come home, stay in this other town until your beards have grown back. Make sure that you get clothing that is, again, respectable, and before you come back. And then there's the people of this nation of Ammon, including the king, realize the error of their ways, and they send an offering to King David, 1,000 talents of silver. I mean, that's 1,000 talents, that'd be 7,500 pounds of silver. Wow, just tremendous wealth is shown there. And they hire a bunch of chariots and everything, to come to war against him. And these people, together with some other nations, gather together to come to battle against David. And David sends his commander, Joab, out against him. And Joab sees that the battle lines are drawn against. He's got people on this side and people on this side. He's trapped in between, and he says to his brother, I'll watch this way and you watch that way. If you struggle, I will send some of mine to your aid. And then verse 13, he says, and may the Lord do what is good in his sight. So this commander, Joab, also knew God. And he knew and saw that, God was leading and guiding the Israelite people. And he had complete faith and trust in God. And he knew that if it was God's will, that the battle would go in their favor. And if not, well, so be it. But as it happens, as the battle came to draw near, the people of Ammon, the Syrians first fled. They saw the armies, they saw that there was no fear, and somehow, God put fear into them, and they fled. And I just love that God caused this to happen. And then when the other opponents, the Ammonites, saw that the Syrians had fled, they too left. And so they were easily defeated. The only thing is that there was still, the numbers of people that were killed in the charioteers, and it's just amazing numbers, astonishing numbers, embarrassing numbers in so many ways. The Syrians fled, and it was 7,000 charioteers and 40,000 foot soldiers. It's just ridiculous numbers of people that senselessly died in these wars. And wars still today are senseless, in so many, but it's the way it is. And chapter 20 begins with those familiar words from 1 Samuel 11 in the spring of the year when kings go to war. And thankfully, we don't hear that story of David's indiscretion with Bathsheba again. We know it happened because we read about it in 1 Samuel 11. But we don't read through that again. The chronicler decides not to report that. But, Joab defeated Rabbah and overthrew it, and David took the king's crown and was successful in that. And starting in verse 4, there was a war, against the Philistines, and the Philistines still had some of the giants, or the descendants of the giants in their armies, and they too, the Philistines, were destroyed and defeated by the armies of King David. And then chapter 21 starts with something somber. Now Satan stood up against Israel, and that, it's just a reminder for us that Satan is always there. It doesn't matter who we are, or what we have, Satan is always there. And here we have King David, who was, other than his indiscretion, I shouldn't say indiscretion, other than his morbid sin with Bathsheba and Uriah the Hittite, was very faithful to God. But Satan, just was working. And he has David come with this idea to have a census. And he's challenged, by Gad, the seer, and it says, I don't think so. And Joab says, I don't think so. But, but anyway, King David decides he's going to do this census. And they send people out. The army goes out, and they count all of the people. And it says, all of Israel had 1,100,000 men who drew the sword. And so, that's besides the women and the children and the people that weren't able to draw the sword. That's a tremendous numbers of people. But he didn't count the tribes of Levi and Benjamin. And then verse 7, God was displeased with this thing, and he struck Israel. And David says to God, I have sinned because I have done this. David takes the responsibility, and he realizes his sin. And he doesn't want the people all punished for his own sin. Although God comes to David and, through the prophet, through Gad, and says, I give you three choices. Either 3 years of famine, 3 months to be defeated by the sword, or 3 days of pestilence upon your lands. And David, again, why should the people be punished for my sin? And I think that's, why should someone else suffer for the sin of the king or anyone that way? But it ends up, that David pleads to God on behalf of all of them. And then after everything is done and David has confessed and asked God for forgiveness, God's response in verse 18 is to have King David go and erect an altar on the threshing floor of Ornan, the Jebusite. And so David goes to do this, in this man's barn, in his threshing floors. And the man says, I will gladly give you the land. I will gladly give you my oxen for the sacrifice. And David says, no, this is on me. And he purchases the land and he purchases the oxen so that it is indeed his sacrifice, not this Ornan, the Ornan sacrifice. And so then the Lord commanded the angel, and the situation ceased that way. And then in chapter 22, David knows that his lifetime is coming to an end at some point, and he knows that God has said that his son Solomon will build the temple. So David begins preparations for the building of the temple. He doesn't start building it, but he begins preparations. He appoints masons to cut stones to build the house of God. He prepared iron for the nails and for the joints and for the doors. And he started to acquire the bronze and then the wood. He started to stockpile everything that would be needed to build the altar. And he says to his son Solomon in verse 6, he calls for his son Solomon and charges him, tells him that this is what God has said, that you will build a house for me. And he said, I thought I should build a house to God, but God said to me, the temple will be built by your son Solomon. I will give peace and quietness to Israel in his days. He will build a house for me. And in verse 12, only may the Lord give you wisdom and understanding, and give you a charge concerning Israel, that you may keep the law of the Lord. So David's plea, David's request to God on behalf of his son Solomon, may the Lord give you wisdom and understanding. And we know from reading that when Solomon becomes king, and what does he ask God for? He asks for wisdom and understanding. So David plants that seed here in his son of asking for this wisdom in Solomon. And, in verse 19, he says, now set your heart and your soul to seek the Lord your God. Rise and build the sanctuary of what it to be. And so David follows the will, the direction of God, and instructs and encourages his son Solomon to do the same. And that's what we do with our children and our others around us, is we then encourage them to follow the Word of God, but first and foremost, to hear the Word of God.